Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Before we begin today's story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Every story here is a journey of love, destiny, and life-changing choices. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And now, let's begin. The strangest thing about life is that sometimes the person everyone ignores turns out to be the one who changes everything. The rain had been falling over Portland for hours, turning the streets into rivers of reflected lights and blurred shadows. Most people hurried past with their heads down, eager to reach warm apartments, crowded restaurants, or waiting families. Harper Whitmore was no different. After a long shift at the community library, all she wanted was to get home, make herself a bowl of tomato soup, and curl up beneath a blanket with a book. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag and stepped carefully around a puddle as cold droplets tapped against her umbrella. At 27, Harper's life was far from glamorous. Her apartment was small. Her bank account was smaller. Most of her paycheck disappeared into rent, groceries, and student loans. Yet somehow she still found reasons to smile. Maybe it was the children who came to the library every week. Maybe it was the old man who donated mystery novels. Maybe it was because she still believed kindness mattered, even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. A sharp gust of wind pushed rain across the sidewalk. Harper pulled her coat tighter and quickened her pace. That was when she noticed him. A man sat alone beneath the narrow awning of a closed hardware store. At first glance, he looked like countless others people walked past every day without a second thought. His dark jacket was soaked. His hair clung to his forehead. One hand rested against the brick wall as if he was struggling to stay upright. Several pedestrians passed within a few feet of him. None stopped. None looked. Harper slowed. Something about him felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his posture. Maybe it was the fact that he wasn't asking anyone for money. He simply sat there in silence while rain splashed. Around him, she hesitated. Her apartment was only 3 blocks away. Common sense told her to keep walking. But then the man lifted his head slightly. Even from a distance, she could see how pale he looked. His eyes were unfocused. His breathing seemed shallow. Harper stopped completely. For a few seconds, she stood frozen beneath her umbrella while traffic hissed through the wet streets. Then she turned around and walked back. The man barely reacted when she approached. "Sir," she asked gently, "are you okay?" His eyes opened a little wider. They were a striking shade of gray. Tired, guarded, yet strangely calm. "I'm fine," he said quietly. His voice sounded rough. Harper immediately knew he wasn't fine. "You don't look fine." A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I appreciate the concern." Another gust of wind swept through the street. The man shivered despite himself. Harper looked down at his trembling hands. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" she asked. He was silent for a moment. Then he looked away. That answer told her everything. Harper's heart tightened. She knew the risks. She knew what her friends would say. But she also knew she couldn't leave him there. Not in weather like this. Not when he looked one cold night away from complete collapse. She hesitated again, glancing toward the empty street. "I should probably call a shelter first," she murmured, reaching for her phone. She searched quickly, but the nearest emergency shelter had already stopped accepting new arrivals for the night because every bed was full. She lowered the phone slowly and looked back at him. Leaving him outside no longer felt like the safer choice. It felt like the wrong one. "My apartment isn't far," she said carefully. "It's not much, but it's warm." The man's expression changed. Surprise flickered across his face. Almost disbelief. "You're offering to let a stranger into your home?" Harper gave a nervous laugh. "When you say it like that, it sounds like a terrible idea." For the first time, the man actually smiled. It was brief, genuine, and somehow it made him look years younger. Most people wouldn't stop. Maybe most people are wrong. He studied her. For several seconds, rain drummed against the awning above them. Cars rolled past. The city continued moving as if nothing unusual was happening. Finally, he nodded once. "Thank you." Harper helped him stand. The moment he rose to his feet, she realized he was taller than she'd expected, well over 6 feet. Yet despite his size, he seemed unsteady. Together, they began walking through the rain toward her apartment. Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple walk through the storm was about to change both of their lives forever. Because the man Harper had just invited home wasn't merely a stranger down on his luck. Hidden beneath the soaked jacket, the exhaustion, and the silence was Nolan Mercer, one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in America. And for the first time in years, the man who seemed to have everything wanted nothing more than the kindness of the woman walking beside him. The apartment was exactly what Nolan expected from Harper, and somehow even more than he imagined. It was small, clean, and filled with the kind of warmth money could never buy. A narrow bookshelf stood against one wall, packed with novels whose corners had been worn from use. Framed sketches rested on a table near the window. A single lamp cast a golden glow across the room, while rain tapped softly against the glass. Harper handed him a towel. "Bathroom is down the hall. You can dry off first." Nolan accepted it with a quiet thank you. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the scene. It had been years since he had stepped inside a place that felt like a home instead of a luxury property designed by consultants and architects. Everything here reflected a real person. Every object had a story. Every corner carried evidence of a life honestly lived. 20 minutes later, Nolan emerged wearing a spare sweatshirt Harper had found in a storage box. It fit a little tighter than his own clothes would have, but it was dry and comfortable. Harper was standing at the stove stirring a pot of soup. The scent of tomatoes and herbs filled the room. "I hope you like tomato soup," she said. "It is all I had." Nolan looked at the steaming bowl she placed in front of him. For reasons he could not explain, it affected him more than any five-star meal ever had. "It looks perfect," he replied. Harper smiled and sat across from him. For several minutes, neither spoke much. The simple meal created a strange sense of peace. Nolan realized he could not remember the last time someone had prepared food for him personally. In his world, meals appeared because assistants arranged them. Tonight, someone had cooked because they cared whether he was hungry. "So," Harper said carefully, wrapping both hands around her mug, "what happened?" Nolan lowered his spoon. He had spent years mastering boardrooms, negotiations, and public interviews. Yet this simple question felt harder than any of them. "I lost my direction," he answered after a moment. It was not a lie, just not the whole truth. Harper studied him. That sounds like something people say when they do not want to explain the real story. Nolan almost laughed. "Maybe." She nodded slowly. "You do not have to tell me." Her answer surprised him. Most people pushed for information. Most people wanted details they could use. Harper simply accepted the boundary. That trust made him feel unexpectedly guilty. Later that night, Harper spread a blanket across her couch. It was old, knitted from soft blue yarn, clearly handmade many years ago. She carefully adjusted it before stepping back. "You can sleep here." Nolan touched the fabric. "This looks important." Harper's expression softened immediately. "My mother made it." Nolan looked up. "Then I should not use it. She would have wanted me to help someone who needed it." The sincerity in her voice left him silent. After she disappeared into her bedroom, Nolan remained alone in the dim apartment. He sat on the couch holding the blue blanket in his hands. In another part of the city, executives were likely searching for him. His phone remained powered off inside the pocket of his soaked jacket. The board of Mercer Dynamics was probably demanding answers. Investors were probably nervous. News outlets were probably speculating. Yet for the first time in years, none of that felt important. Across the apartment wall hung one of Harper's sketches. It showed a lighthouse, standing against a storm. Beneath it, written in small letters, were the words, "Keep going." Nolan stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he lay back against the couch and pulled the blanket over himself. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the apartment remained quiet. As sleep finally began to pull him under, one thought lingered in his mind. Harper Whitmore had opened her door to a complete stranger without knowing his name, his status, or his bank account. And somehow that simple act of kindness had already become more valuable to him than everything waiting in the world he had left behind. The next morning arrived with sunlight spilling through the apartment window and painting soft golden lines across the living room floor. Nolan woke slowly, confused for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then he saw the blue blanket draped over him and remembered everything. The rain, the storm, Harper. For the first time in months, maybe years, he realized he had slept through an entire night without checking emails, reviewing reports, or waking to the sound of his phone demanding attention. The apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of music drifting from the kitchen. Nolan sat up and followed the scent of fresh coffee. Harper stood by the counter wearing a gray sweater and reading glasses, flipping through a notebook while scrambling eggs in a small pan. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning. You are alive." Nolan laughed softly. I think so. Good. I was beginning to wonder if I should call a doctor. She handed him a mug of coffee. Breakfast will not win any awards, but it is edible. Nolan accepted the mug and felt unexpected gratitude. The simple kindness still caught him off guard. Over breakfast, they talked more than they had the night before. Harper shared stories about the library, the children who visited every week, and the elderly regulars who treated the building like a second home. Nolan listened carefully. Most people spent conversations trying to impress others. Harper talked about people she cared about. It revealed more about her character than any resume ever could. By the end of the meal, Harper glanced at the clock. I need to leave in 20 minutes. Nolan nodded. Thank you for everything. She hesitated. You still do not have anywhere to go, do you? Nolan remained silent. The answer was obvious. Harper sighed. You can stay a few more days until you figure things out. Nolan looked genuinely surprised. Are you sure? Probably not, she admitted with a nervous smile. But I think it is the right thing to do. After she left for work, Nolan stood alone in the apartment. He noticed a loose cabinet door in the kitchen, a leaking faucet, a shelf that leaned slightly to one side. Small problems, the kind nobody with unlimited resources would ever notice. Yet somehow fixing them felt satisfying. By the time Harper returned that evening, the faucet no longer dripped. The cabinet door closed properly. The crooked shelf stood perfectly level. Harper stared in disbelief. How did you do all that? Nolan shrugged. I had some free time. Most people watch television when they have free time. I am not most people. The answer slipped out before he could stop himself. Harper laughed. That much is obvious. Days turned into a week. Nolan began helping around the apartment whenever Harper was gone. He carried groceries upstairs, fixed an old lamp she had nearly thrown away, even organized several boxes of books stacked in the corner. Harper found herself looking forward to coming home. The apartment no longer felt empty. One Saturday afternoon, she convinced Nolan to join her at the library. He spent hours helping move donated books and setting up tables for a community reading event. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody treated him differently. Watching families laugh together and children race between shelves created a strange ache inside him. His own life had become so consumed by wealth and responsibility that he had forgotten what ordinary happiness looked like. Later that evening, Harper discovered him studying one of her sketches near the window. It showed a small boat crossing rough water beneath a bright lighthouse. You really like my drawings, she said. Nolan turned toward her. You see beauty where other people see ordinary things. Harper looked away, slightly embarrassed. Nobody has ever said that before. Nolan smiled. Then they were not paying attention. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The apartment felt unusually quiet, comfortable, safe. Harper felt her heartbeat quicken for reasons she could not explain. Nolan experienced something similar. Neither of them noticed how naturally the distance between them had begun to disappear. What started as a single act of kindness was quietly becoming something neither expected. And somewhere beyond the walls of that small apartment, a powerful world was still searching for the man who had seemingly vanished without a trace. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt almost too comfortable. Every morning Harper left for the library while Nolan stayed behind, helping around the apartment and quietly rebuilding parts of himself he had ignored for years. Every evening they shared dinner, traded stories, and laughed more easily than either expected. For Harper, it felt as though a missing piece had somehow appeared in her life without warning. For Nolan, it felt dangerously close to peace. That was exactly why the outside world began forcing its way back in. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. Harper was shelving books near the front windows when a black sport utility vehicle pulled up outside the library. The vehicle looked expensive enough to cost more than her entire apartment building. Two men in dark suits stepped out and scanned the street. Harper barely paid attention at first. Wealthy donors occasionally visited community programs. But then one of the men walked directly toward the entrance. Harper looked up from her cart. Can I help you? The man offered a polite smile. We are looking for someone. He held up a photograph on his phone. Harper's stomach tightened instantly. It was Nolan. The picture looked more polished than the man she knew. The Nolan in the photograph wore a tailored suit and stood in front of a skyscraper. Yet there was no mistaking his face. Harper forced herself to remain calm. I do not think I have seen him. The man studied her expression for a second before nodding. If you do, please let him know people are concerned about him. After they left, Harper stood frozen beside the circulation desk, concerned about him. The words echoed in her head. What kind of person had people searching for him in luxury vehicles? That evening she tried to ignore the uneasy feeling. Nolan was preparing pasta in the kitchen when she walked through the apartment door. "You look tired," he said. Harper set down her bag. "Some men were looking for you today." The wooden spoon stopped moving, only for a second, but she noticed. "For me?" Nolan asked carefully. "They had your picture." Silence settled between them. Harper watched his expression. He recovered quickly, almost too quickly. Probably a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that requires men in expensive suits. Nolan looked away. "I used to work with people like that." It was technically true. Harper wanted to ask more questions, but something stopped her. She sensed a wall he was not ready to lower. Over the next several days, similar things happened. A luxury sedan appeared outside her apartment building one afternoon. Another black vehicle waited across the street from the library. Each time Nolan seemed to notice before anyone else. Each time he found a reason to leave through a different exit or remain out of sight. Harper's curiosity continued growing. So did her concern. Then one night, she woke unexpectedly around 2 a.m. A faint voice drifted from the living room. "Nolan." Harper stepped quietly into the hallway. The apartment was dark except for the glow of a phone screen. Nolan stood near the window, speaking in a low voice. "I said no." His tone was calm, but firm. A pause followed. "The board will survive another week." Another pause. "I am not coming back yet." Harper's heart skipped. The board. Coming back. None of it sounded like the life of an ordinary man trying to get back on his feet. Before she could hear more, Nolan turned slightly. Harper stepped back into the shadows and returned to her room. The next morning he acted as though nothing had happened. Yet something had changed. For the first time since bringing him home, Harper felt uncertainty creeping into her thoughts. She cared about Nolan, more than she wanted to admit. But the pieces of his story no longer fit together. And somewhere deep inside, she began to wonder if the man she was slowly falling for was hiding far more than a difficult past. The questions in Harper's mind continued growing, but so did something else she could no longer ignore. Every day, she found herself looking for Nolan without meaning to. She noticed the way he always washed the dishes before she could reach the sink. The way he remembered which tea she preferred after stressful days. The way he listened when she talked about her dreams as though they were important. One rainy evening, they walked home from the library together after a community fundraiser. The streets glistened beneath rows of streetlights, and the cool air carried the scent of fresh rain. Harper pulled her coat tighter around herself. Nolan immediately slowed his pace to match hers. It was such a small gesture, yet it touched her more than expensive gifts ever could. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Nolan glanced toward her. "Of course. What did you want to be when you were younger?" He smiled faintly. "That is an unusual question." "Maybe, but I realized I know almost nothing about your life before all this." Nolan looked ahead at the wet sidewalk. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered honestly, at least partly. "I wanted freedom." Harper laughed softly. "Most kids want to be astronauts or baseball players. I was not a very normal kid." "I believe that." Their eyes met briefly, and both smiled. The moment lingered longer than either expected. Later that night, they shared takeout containers at the tiny kitchen table. The conversation flowed easily. Harper told stories from college. Nolan shared harmless memories from his early career without revealing names or companies. Hours passed before either noticed. For the first time in years, Nolan felt himself becoming attached to someone in a way that had nothing to do with business, influence, or expectations. Harper liked him when she believed he had nothing. That truth terrified him because it made what he felt for her real. During the following days, their connection deepened naturally. On Saturday morning, Harper took Nolan to a small farmer's market near the waterfront. They sampled homemade bread, listened to local musicians, and wandered through booths filled with handmade crafts. At one stand, Harper stopped to admire a collection of paintings. Nolan noticed how her eyes lit up. "You should be selling your work here," he said. Harper shook her head immediately. "My sketches are just a hobby." "No," Nolan replied gently. "They are good. You have not seen enough art to know that." Nolan almost laughed at the irony. He had attended gallery openings worth millions of dollars. Yet somehow her simple sketches affected him more than most of the artwork he had encountered. "Trust me," he said. "I know quality when I see it." Harper felt warmth rise to her cheeks, and quickly looked away. That evening, after returning home, they sat together on the apartment rooftop watching the city lights flicker beneath the darkening sky. Neither spoke much. The silence felt comfortable. Harper finally turned toward him. "You know, when I first saw you that night, I thought you would stay one evening and disappear the next morning." Nolan looked at her. "And now?" She smiled softly. "Now I am glad you stayed." The words settled between them. Honest. Uncomplicated. Nolan felt something shift inside his chest. For a brief moment, he imagined a future where none of the complications existed. A future where there were no board meetings, no shareholders, no endless pressure. Just evenings like this one. Just Harper. But even as the thought appeared, reality waited in the shadows. The life he had stepped away from was not finished with him. Somewhere across the country, reporters were still searching for answers. Executives were still calling. Investors were still demanding his return. And although Nolan wanted nothing more than to remain exactly where he was, he knew the world he had abandoned would eventually come looking for him again. The only question was whether it would arrive before he found the courage to tell Harper the truth. The truth arrived on a Thursday afternoon, disguised as an opportunity. Harper was sorting returned books when the library director rushed into her office, carrying a gold envelope. "You are not going to believe this," she said. Harper looked up in confusion. "Believe what?" The director handed her the envelope. Inside was an invitation to one of the largest charity galas in the city. Harper read the elegant lettering twice, then a third time. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," the director replied. "The foundation sponsoring several community literacy programs specifically requested that someone from our library attend." Harper stared at the invitation. She had never attended a gala. People like her did not attend events held inside luxury hotels with crystal chandeliers and celebrity donors. Yet by Saturday evening, she found herself standing inside the grand ballroom of the Portland Regency Hotel, wearing the nicest dress she owned. The room glittered with wealth. Conversations floated through the air. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Everywhere Harper looked, powerful people seemed completely at ease in a world she barely understood. For the first hour, she managed to relax. Several guests asked about the library. Others expressed interest in community education projects. Harper slowly began feeling less out of place. Then the lights dimmed. A voice echoed through the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight." Applause filled the room. Harper turned toward the massive stage at the center of the ballroom. A presentation began playing across enormous screens. Images of schools, hospitals, and charitable programs flashed across the displays. The narrator spoke about leadership, innovation, and philanthropy. Harper listened politely until one photograph appeared. Her entire body froze. The image showed Nolan. Not the Nolan she knew from the apartment. Not the man in borrowed sweatshirts fixing shelves and carrying groceries. This Nolan wore a tailored suit and stood in front of a glass skyscraper. Beneath the image appeared a name. Nolan Mercer, founder and chief executive officer. Mercer Dynamics. Harper felt her breath disappear. No, that was impossible. The screen changed again. More photographs appeared. Magazine covers. Business awards. Interviews. Headlines. Billionaire entrepreneur. Industry leader. One of America's most influential executives. Harper could barely hear the narrator anymore. The room seemed to tilt around her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought others might hear it. Then the announcer smiled. "Please welcome tonight's guest of honor, Mr. Nolan Mercer." The entire ballroom rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the room. Harper slowly turned toward the stage entrance. And there he was. Nolan walked into the spotlight wearing a black suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Confident, composed, powerful. The audience greeted him like royalty. Harper stared in disbelief. Every unanswered question suddenly had an answer. The men in suits. The mysterious phone calls. The expensive vehicles. The references to a board. None of it had been random. The homeless man she had brought home during a storm was one of the wealthiest people in the country. Nolan stepped to the podium. For a brief second, his eyes scanned the audience. Then he saw her. Everything changed. The practiced confidence vanished from his expression. The color drained slightly from his face. Harper knew immediately that he had never intended for her to learn the truth this way. But it was too late. The secret stood exposed beneath 1,000 lights. Nolan tried to continue his speech. Harper never heard a word. She quietly stepped away from the table and moved toward the ballroom exit. Her mind replayed every conversation they had shared, every half-answer, every omission, every moment she had trusted him. By the time she reached the hallway outside, one painful question echoed louder than all the others. If Nolan Mercer had lied about who he was, what else had he been hiding from her all along? Harper barely remembered leaving the hotel. One moment she was standing beneath crystal chandeliers listening to applause for Nolan Mercer, and the next she was walking through cold night air with tears threatening to form despite her efforts to stop them. The city lights blurred as she made her way home. Every memory from the past few weeks replayed in her mind with painful clarity. The soup, the rooftop conversations, the farmers market, the late-night laughter. Had any of it been real? By the time she reached her apartment, she felt emotionally exhausted. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar warmth that had once comforted her now felt different. Everywhere she looked, she saw traces of Nolan. The repaired cabinet, the organized bookshelves, the sketch he had framed for her beside the window. Harper sank into a chair and stared at the blue blanket folded neatly on the couch. The blanket her mother had made. The blanket she had trusted him with. A few minutes later, the apartment door opened. Harper looked up. Nolan stood in the doorway. He had already changed out of the formal suit, but it did not matter. She had seen the truth. There was no going back. "Harper," he said quietly, "please let me explain." She laughed once, though there was no humor in it. "Explain what exactly?" Nolan stepped forward. "I never wanted you to find out that way." "Find out what way?" Harper asked. "That the man sleeping on my couch was actually one of the richest people in America?" Nolan lowered his eyes. "I know how this looks." "Do you?" Harper stood. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you lied to me every single day." "I never lied about who I was as a person. You hid who you were." Her voice trembled. "That matters." Nolan moved closer. "The feelings I have for you are real." Harper shook her head. "You do not get to say that right now." Silence filled the room. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Harper asked the question that hurt most. "Was I some kind of test?" Nolan looked genuinely shocked. "What? Was I another experiment?" she continued. "The billionaire pretending to have nothing so he could see who would be kind to him?" "No." The answer came instantly. "Never." Harper wanted to believe him. Part of her still did. That was what made everything worse. Nolan ran a hand through his hair. "I left because I needed to get away. I was drowning in that world. And yet you never trusted me enough to tell me the truth." Nolan had no answer. Harper felt tears building again and looked away. "I opened my home to you." Her voice softened. "I thought I knew you." Nolan took another step forward. "You do know me." "No," Harper whispered. "I know Nolan, the man who fixed shelves and drank coffee in my kitchen. I do not know Nolan Mercer." The words hit harder than she intended. She saw the pain cross his face. Yet she could not stop. Not now. She walked to the hallway table and picked up a key card Nolan had recently been given by one of his assistants after reconnecting with his company. She held it out to him. "You should go." Nolan stared at the key card and then at her. "Harper, please." The single word carried more sadness than anger. After a long silence, Nolan accepted it. Before turning toward the door, Nolan quietly folded the blue knitted blanket Harper had once lent him and held it close for a moment. Harper noticed, but said nothing. Somehow, seeing him carry it away hurt even more than watching him leave. Neither moved for several seconds. Finally he nodded. "I never meant to hurt you." Harper folded her arms tightly across her chest. "Goodbye, Nolan." He stood there for one last moment, as if hoping she might change her mind. Then he turned and walked out the door. The apartment fell silent. Harper listened as his footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Only when she was completely alone did she allow herself to cry. Across the city, Nolan sat inside the back of a waiting car and looked down at the blue thread still caught on the sleeve of the sweater he had borrowed weeks ago. For the first time since returning to his old life, the billionaire who seemed to have everything felt as though he had lost the one thing that truly mattered. Several months passed, but time did little to heal either of them. Harper buried herself in work, determined to move forward, yet reminders of Nolan seemed to appear everywhere. A repaired bookshelf would catch her eye. A favorite coffee mug would bring back a memory. Even the blue blanket on the couch felt different now. She told herself she was angry. She told herself she was disappointed. The problem was that none of those feelings managed to erase how much she missed him. Across town, Nolan had returned to the world he once controlled. Meetings filled his calendar. Reporters followed his movements. Investors celebrated his return. From the outside, everything looked exactly as it had before. Inside, Nolan was unraveling. During board meetings, he caught himself staring through the glass walls instead of listening to financial presentations. More than once, an executive had to repeat a simple question because he had not heard a single word. Invitations to charity galas, award ceremonies, and exclusive business dinners continued arriving every week, but Nolan quietly declined every one of them. None of those rooms held the person he wanted to see. Nights became even harder. Sleep rarely lasted more than a few hours before memories pulled him awake. Almost every morning, he found himself walking across the silent penthouse toward a single chair near the window where Harper's blue knitted blanket remained carefully folded. He would pick it up, run his fingers across the soft yarn, and remember the tiny apartment where someone had offered warmth without asking who he was. For the first time in his life, the billionaire understood that losing trust hurt far more than losing money. On paper, everything was back to normal. In reality, nothing felt right. The penthouse overlooking the city felt colder than Harper's tiny apartment had ever felt. The catered meals tasted bland compared to simple dinners at her kitchen table. Every success felt strangely hollow. One morning, during a board meeting, Nolan found himself staring out the window while executives debated quarterly projections. Their voices faded into background noise. For the first time in his career, numbers no longer seemed like the most important thing in the room. That realization changed everything. Later that afternoon, Nolan called the head of his charitable foundation. "I want to launch a new project," he said. "Something focused on community libraries, literacy programs, and local artists." The executive sounded surprised. "That is a significant investment." "Good," Nolan replied. "Make it happen." Over the next month, an ambitious initiative quietly took shape. New funding flowed into community education programs across Oregon. Grants were established for young artists. Several aging libraries received renovation support. Yet Nolan kept his name away from the public announcements. He was not trying to repair his reputation. He was trying to honor someone who had reminded him what truly mattered. Meanwhile, Harper remained completely unaware of who was funding the changes. Then one Friday afternoon, the library director rushed into her office carrying another envelope. "You have been invited to a special unveiling ceremony," she said excitedly. Harper blinked. "Another gala?" "Not exactly. Apparently, someone financed a major community project, and they specifically requested your attendance." 2 days later, Harper arrived at a renovated building on the edge of downtown. The structure had once been an abandoned warehouse. Now it stood transformed into a beautiful community center filled with books, art studios, classrooms, and gathering spaces. Families wandered through the halls admiring the renovations. Children explored reading corners. Local artists displayed their work along the walls. Harper stood speechless. It was exactly the kind of place she had often dreamed about creating. Then she noticed a plaque near the entrance. "The Harper Project." Her breath caught. She stared at the words. Confused, emotional, overwhelmed. Why would anyone name something like this after her? A volunteer approached with a warm smile. The founder wanted the project named after the person who inspired it. Harper's heart began racing. Suddenly, dozens of small details connected in her mind. The literacy programs, the art grants, the anonymous funding, the timing. Slowly, she walked deeper into the building. At the center of the main gallery stood a glass display case. Inside rested a familiar blue blanket. Her mother's blanket. The same one she had given Nolan on the night they met. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Beneath the display sat a small plaque. It read, "The night someone chose kindness instead of judgment changed my life forever." Harper covered her mouth with trembling fingers. For the first time since the truth had been revealed, she began to understand something important. Nolan had never been trying to impress her with wealth. He had been trying to become the man she believed he already was. And somewhere inside the building that existed because of her kindness, Harper realized the story between them might not be over after all. Harper stood motionless in front of the glass display case, while people continued moving through the community center around her. The blue blanket rested beneath the lights like a treasured piece of history. For everyone else, it was simply a blanket. For her, it represented a choice made on a rainy night when she had opened her door to a stranger. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. I hoped you would come. Harper slowly turned. Nolan stood several feet away. There was no stage. No audience waiting to applaud. No expensive spotlight. Just Nolan. For a moment, neither moved. The emotions of the past several weeks seemed to fill the space between them. Harper looked at him carefully. You built all of this. Nolan nodded. Not alone. Hundreds of people helped. But the idea started because of you. Harper glanced around the building. Children laughed in a reading corner. Local artists discussed paintings hanging along the walls. Families explored classrooms that would soon host free programs. Why? She asked softly. Nolan smiled. Because you reminded me what success is supposed to accomplish. Harper felt her throat tighten. Nolan stepped closer. When I met you, I had spent years building companies and chasing goals. Everyone admired what I had created. But somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the person creating it. He looked toward the blue blanket. Then one night a woman who had every reason to walk away chose kindness instead. Harper listened in silence. Nolan took a slow breath. You thought I was testing you. I did. I understand why. His voice remained calm. But the truth is that you were never the one being tested. Harper's eyes met his. Nolan continued. I was. The honesty in his words left her speechless. For the first time since the gala, she saw the same man who had fixed shelves in her apartment and carried grocery bags without being asked. The same man who had listened to her dreams as though they mattered. The same man she had fallen for before she ever knew his last name. Nolan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. Harper opened it carefully. Inside was a worn $10 sketch she had once drawn on a napkin while drinking coffee at her kitchen table. Nolan had secretly saved it. Written beneath the drawing were the words she had spoken weeks earlier. Keep going. Harper laughed through unexpected tears. You kept this. I kept everything that reminded me of who I wanted to become. The noise of the building seemed to disappear. Nolan looked at her with complete sincerity. Before you knew who I was, you chose me. Not the company. Not the money. Not the reputation. Just me. Then, to Harper's complete surprise, Nolan lowered himself onto one knee. Several nearby visitors noticed and quietly stepped back. The room grew still. Nolan held out a small ring. Elegant. Simple. Thoughtful. Exactly like the man she had come to know. Harper Whitmore, he said, his voice steady. You changed my life long before you learned my name. You gave me a home when I felt lost. You reminded me that kindness matters. You reminded me who I wanted to be. I do not want a perfect life. I do not want another achievement. I only want a future with you. Will you marry me? Tears filled Harper's eyes. The answer came instantly. Yes. Applause erupted throughout the building as Nolan stood and wrapped her in a warm embrace. Months later, they exchanged vows in a small ceremony surrounded by friends, library staff, local families, and community members whose lives had been touched by the project. The blue blanket remained carefully preserved in a special place inside their home. Not because it was valuable, but because it reminded them where everything began. And whenever people asked how a billionaire CEO and a librarian found each other, they always smiled at the same memory. A rainy night, an open door, and one simple act of kindness that changed two lives forever. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from, and subscribe to the Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.